The Kuti Sikha is Chelek of Zayin, volume 27, the first Sikha of Parshas Emor. This Sikha will explain the power of positive speech when one speaks positively about another Jew and the effect that it could have, and also will give us insight into how one can fulfill the directive of the sages, Hevedonis kol adam l'kav zchus, to always judge others mereticiously, even when you see someone doing something wrong, how that's possible. As a quick introduction, in order to better flow through the Sikha, so we know in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, as well as in English, there are various verbs for speech, for saying things. And the ones we'll focus on here is Emor versus Daber. Emor means to say, Daber means to speak. Typically, we know the Chazal tell us that Emor represents more of a soft, of a easy, pleasant type of talking, versus Daber, which usually connotates a more firm, stern, as the sages tell us, Lashon Kosher, a more severe, a more strong, impactive type of speech. Another thing to be familiar with which the Rebbe always emphasizes, the fact that Torah, what is the Torah all about? Torah miloshen Hora'ah. Torah means that it's directive. Each and every single detail, each and every single aspect of the Torah, and the parshas that we read week by week are all directives, teaching us how to live our life. And then we have the Mishnah in the first chapter of Perkei Avos, where it says, Hevedon es kol adam l'kav zchus, that you always have to judge every single person l'kav zchus in a meretricious manner. Now, of course, it's very difficult on the surface to understand this. You see someone doing something wrong. You see someone doing something terrible. Someone doing something felonious. How can you? There's one thing if you say, don't look at him in a negative light. Try to not judge. But how do you find, where is the schus, where is the meretricious aspect of this when it's all negative? And one more last thing. In the very first verse of this week's parsha, Emor, it says, Emor, you should say, and then it says, Va'amar talem, and you shall say to them, both in the same verse. So the sages tell us that this double expression of Emor ve'amarta is lahazhir gedolim alaktanim. Literally, this means lahazir means to warn, to caution. The gedolim, the grown-ups, the older ones, the greater ones, on the ktanim, on the younger ones. That means, generally speaking, there are most mitzvot. There is no obligation for the elders, for the parents that is, or teachers, educators, to enforce it with the youngsters. However, there is certain key and fundamental mitzvot, such as that which connects to the purity, to the essence of the Jew, like laws of purity, laws of kashrut, and in this case for Kohanim, the laws of their purity, that the Gdolim have an obligation, the elders, the adults have an obligation to see to it that the Ktanim, that the young ones, those even who are under the age of Bar Mitzvah, also fulfill this obligation. However, Chassidus has a deeper pirush, a deeper meaning to this, because the word is not to command the elders over the youngsters, but rather lahazir. The word lahazir also comes from the etymology of the word zohar, which means to shine, that to glow, that through the efforts and emphasis of the Gdolim, those who were the great ones, the Ktanim, those who were the lesser ones, and in depends how you apply it, whether they're young in age or young in character or young in accomplishment, they also begin to shine, they begin to glow. That means it brings out the greatness that's in them. Let's go into the Sikha. So as discussed many times, every single thing in the Torah is a directive, a teaching for life. To each and every Jew, in every time and in every place. And that's not only this is not exclusive to the actual content of the parsha itself, but even the name of the parsha brings out a lesson, teaches us something. So now what does Emor mean? Emor means that not only is it okay to say, but the word Emor has the effect of a command. It's telling us that you have to say, and that it has to be a continuous saying. The question is, to say what? Of course, it's not coming to tell us that you should be saying, you should be speaking in the words of Torah. Because for that, we don't need to have another teaching. We don't need to have another commandment. We have it already in the words that it says, V'dibarta bam. We recite it every day. You shall speak in them in the words of Torah. So it's obvious, and even in the words of Torah, there seems to be a caution of speaking too much. We know that the sages tell us, for example, that that it's best and the right way for a person to teach his students always in a derech tzara, always in a very, very compact and a very, very concise manner, meaning don't say extra words because that's going to make it difficult for them to understand. So what exactly are we speaking about here when we're being encouraged to talk, to say more? So the answer is that matters which appear in Torah Shebiksav, in the written Torah, typically are better expressed, they're expounded upon in Torah Shebal Peh. And in our matter, we see it directly in the Medrash, right on the beginning of our Parsha. On these words, Emor el HaKoyanim, say to the Koyanim. So the Medrash brings as follows. It brings the verse from Tehillim, chapter 12, verse 7. And it says over there, Imrois Hashem Amoris Tahiris, that the words, the sayings of Hashem are pure words. So the Medrash says that typically, the way it works in the world, a king comes to a country, comes to visit, all the people come out and they exalt him and they say his praises and he enjoys the praises. And as a result, this triggers in him to make certain promises to them. And he says to them, I'll build this, I'll build that, I'll do this for you, I'll enhance your infrastructure, so on and so forth. And then says the Medrash, it's possible that he goes to sleep that very same night and he doesn't wake up in the morning. So where are his words? Where are his promises? Says the Medrash, Hashem is not so. Hashem says, what did we say in reference to Hashem? It says, V'Hashem Elikim Emes. The prophet Yirmiyahu says that Hashem is truth. Why do you say Hashem is truth? Because truth never dies, truth never stops. But since Hashem is Elokim Chayim Umelech Olam, since he is the living God and the King of the world, when he gives a promise, it's going to happen. When he says something, and that, says the Medrash, what the pasuk is referring to, what David HaMelech is referring to when he says, Imes Hashem Amoris Taharis, that they are pure words, that they are real, that they're always true. Because when Hashem gives a commitment, you know that it's going to happen. Now, in the Chumash, in Parshas V'Eschana, and we always recite this verse before we begin reading the Torah, and before we begin to recite Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Targum. We say, V'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom, that since you cleave to Hashem, you, the Jewish people, cleave to Hashem, so you are all alive today. So therefore, if Hashem is Elokim Chayim, Hashem is the living God, we are like always alive. And from this we understand that also the Imrois, the saying of a Yid, now that a Yid is alive like Hashem, then when a Yid speaks purely and positively about another Jew, certainly that becomes fulfilled. This gives us already an insight about this idea of Emor. Now when Hashem says something, not only is it a saying, but as we see in the very creation of the world, Hashem said 10 utterances. Those utterances weren't merely words, they were actually true, in fact, actions. They made the world. So likewise, when a Jew speaks positively about another Jew, when a Jew talks and says positive things about another Jew, likewise, this causes positivity in the life of that person and in the existence of that person and in that person's surroundings. But the question is, precisely what is this saying? What are we meant to say? We get it. Saying positive things, but what? Saying what? Well, the second part of that very same medrash which we just quoted will shed light on this. It says over there as follows. We find that even young children in the era of David HaMelech, before they, quote, tasted the taste of sin, they knew how to study Torah and how to darshan the Torah in 49 manners. 49, that is 49 times 2. 49 Tahir, 49 Tamid. That means they had this deep and extensive appreciation of Torah. And that's what David HaMelech prays for them in the very next verse in that same chapter of Tehillim, in chapter 12, where he says, Ata Hashem Tishmereim, that you Hashem should guard them. What does it mean you Hashem should guard them? That you should, says the Medrash, that you should protect the Torah in their hearts. And Tinser Medarazu, and you should protect them and you should preserve them. David HaMelech is saying, you should make this continue. In other words, he's speaking the praise of his generation, that even youngsters, how much more so those older than them, those seasoned students, how much Torah they knew and their power and ability in learning and understanding Torah. Yet, says the Medrash, that still, even though they were so great in Torah, they would go out to war, and unfortunately, they would fall in combat. How is that possible? How could it be if they have such a high level? So the Medrash says, because there were those amongst them that spoke Lashon Hara, and they said terrible things about each other. They would snitch on each other. And then the Medrash goes on, continues in depth and in detail in the severity of speaking Lashon Hara, and it concludes, and it says Lashon Hara, we find elsewhere, is called the triple language, the triple tongue. Why? What is the association of Lashon Hara with 3? With the number 3. So the Medrash concludes, and it says, because Lashon Hara kills, it affects negatively all 3. That is the speaker, the one who is transmitting the Lashon Hara, the listener, the one who's receiving the Lashon Hara, and thirdly, the one who it's being spoken about. From this we can understand, says the Rebbe, from this second part of the Medrash, we can understand that if speaking negatively about another person has such a terrible effect, how much more so when you speak positively about a person, how much more so that it has a positive effect. So we're getting already an idea of what we are supposed to do the opposite. Not only we're not supposed to, you should not speak negatively about another Jew, but we should be in the habit of speaking positively. How can we understand this? In other words, give us a little better appreciation of this. So for that, says the Rebbe, we will preface with the words of the Rambam in Hilchas Deis. Now we know Hilchas Deis in the Rambam, the very beginning of the Rambam's monumental work about Jewish life and Jewish law, the Rambam gives us an outlook on life, the way one is supposed to behave, the mannerisms and the norms of a Jew. So first in chapter 5, 7th halacha, he speaks over there, he describes the responsibilities, the obligations of a Talmid Chacham, somebody who is clearly above the fray. And one of the things he says is, quote, Misaper b'shvach havere, that he always speaks in the praise of another, Veloi bignuse klal, and he never does he speak disgracefully about this person. That means not only does he always speak positively, but he never speaks negatively. Okay, take note of that. Now, in the next chapter, where the Rambam's talking about all people, meaning every single Jew, there he says that it's one of the things he mentions is that it's a mitzvah to love each and every Jew. And one of the examples he gives, to love every Jew like yourself, and one of the examples he gives is to always speak in the praise of another Jew. So now we need to understand why the difference between the Talmid Chacham and the obligation of a regular Jew. When he speaks about, what does he mean when he, in reference to the Talmid Chacham, that he always speaks about in the praise of another? Why is this different? How is this different? And therefore, why is it singled out from the general mitzvah for every Jew to speak positively about another Jew, which he quotes in the following chapter, as we just quoted it? So why does he make this distinction? That's number one. Number two, then he goes on to emphasize that the Talmid Chacham not only speaks positively, but he also never speaks negatively about the person. He doesn't speak disparagingly about the person. It seems that this is not exclusive for Talmid Chacham. On the surface, it would seem that this really applies to everyone, because you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara, so you're not allowed to talk negatively about anybody. You're not allowed to speak in a derogative, negative manner about any Jew. So why is this exclusive? What is this unique to a Talmid Chacham? And number three, it would seem that the order in which the Rambam presents it seems to be out of order. Because first it would seem that the first and foremost, you're not supposed to speak negatively. You shouldn't talk Lashon Hara about another Jew. And then you add and you increase, so to speak, in piety, in the degree of love for another Jew by speaking his praise. But here the Rambam says no. First he lists the fact that you're supposed to exclusively speak in the praise of another Jew if you're a Talmud Chacham. Then he adds Veloy b'gnusay klal, and you should never speak disparagingly about it. So it's what is it about this order? What really is the Rambam saying? Says the Rebbe, from all this we can surmise that we can come to a conclusion that the Rambam is referring to something unique that exists by a Talmud Chacham. That means true. Nobody is allowed to speak negatively about another Jew because you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara. It's true that everybody has the obligation to speak positively about another Jew as much as possible. But then that the Rambam is focusing on something that is unique and special to a Talmud Chacham, that not only that he speak positively about somebody, but also, moreover, there's something about the Talmud Chacham that he also doesn't speak about, or as we'll see soon, doesn't even see the negativity. The answer is as follows. The Talmud Chacham has to always speak in the praise of another to fulfill what it says in the Mishnah, the one we quoted in the introduction, have a done es kol ha'adam l'kaf, that you always have to judge another Jew favorably. And in addition to that, says the Rambam, this type of person who really does have a lot of negativity, the fact is, if you have to start to judge favorably, that means that the person is behaving in an unfavorable manner. And here's what the Rambam adds, that a Talmud Chacham, not only does he fulfill this basic fundamental teaching of judging another Jew favorably, but even moreover, that he doesn't even see in him any negativity. And this is where the Talmud Chacham stands apart from everyone else. Because a regular Jew sees the negativity, sees that the person has perhaps many faults, and the fact is they're behaving in accordance with their faults, sadly, and yet they try to speak positively. But not to see the faults, that is something which is not expected from a regular person. But we need to understand, says the Rebbe, why the difference between a Talmud Chacham and a regular Jew. I mean, if this is an ideal for a Talmud Chacham, it seems that it should be for every single Jew. Why shouldn't every person be obligated to try to see only positive in another Jew and never to see negative? The answer is because the Rambam himself, when describing what the lifestyle of a Talmud Chacham needs to be like, he emphasizes that a Talmud Chacham has to always behave in a manner that Ruach Habriyos Noicha Menu, that the common people feel pleasant about him. And this affects the difference between the obligations of a regular Jew and a Talmud Chacham. You see, when you see someone else doing something wrong, when we witness somebody doing something which is obviously against Torah or morality or ethics, we have to do something about it. What do? There are two approaches that basically can take place. There is the common one, which is a mitzvah in the Torah. In fact, it was in last week's parsha, which a regular Jew who's not a Talmud Chacham has to fulfill the mitzvah of you have to rebuke your fellow. You go and you tell him, listen, this is not allowed. Of course, you have to do it in the proper manner, without hurting his feelings, without incurring any sin. Fine. But you do need to tell him, and you tell him what he's doing wrong and why it's wrong. However, then there's the other approach. There's the approach of the Talmud Chacham, that as the Rambam says, he has to be benachas in abris. Always has to be in a pleasant manner with everybody. He doesn't go and attack the negativity of that person. In fact, what he does is he totally voids the negativity of the person, but in a pleasant manner. How does he do it? By speaking the person's praise and not seeing any negativity in him at all. And through this type of approach, through this type of this manner, the Talmud Chacham does away with the negativity of that Jew, with the shortcomings of that Jew, with the problems that that Jew has. Instead of attacking the problem, he builds up the good in the person. He brings the Jew, he lifts him up, that the bad falls away. And this is all fits into what the Rambam says, that the Talmud Chacham's mode of behavior is always in a pleasant manner. And this is along the lines, we can appreciate it, but what the Medrash concludes, we quoted earlier, that Lashon Hara kills all three. Now if you think about it, 2 out of the 3 make sense. The person who's speaking the Lashon Hara, obviously he's the one spreading the Lashon Hara. So certainly it should kill him, has a negative effect on him. The person who's receiving it, who's listening to it, it's also understandable and it's obvious that he is a culprit here. Why? Because if he wouldn't be listening, the guy would have no one to tell it to. So he's actively involved in the Lashon Hara. But the question is, why does it have an effect, or how does it have an effect on the person that it's being spoken about? What did he do? He's not a party to this. The answer is that this is unfortunately the reality. And that's what the Medrash is telling us. That when you speak bad about someone, it has an effect. It brings out the bad that's in it. It could be the bad's there. But when you talk about it, when you discuss it, even from afar, it brings it out in the person. So therefore, if you wouldn't be speaking Lashon Hara about this person, perhaps the bad would remain dormant. It wouldn't have come to the surface. It wouldn't have been exposed. It wouldn't have become active. Now says the Rebbe, if this is so in the negative, we know, the Chazal tell us that meruba mida toiva mida paranis, that a good measure is always many times stronger than a bad one. And therefore, if this is so in the negative, that just talking about somebody's negativity brings it out, how much more so when you speak about the positive. And this is something even deeper. This is what the Rambam means when the Rambam says that he doesn't speak about his negativity at all. Why does he write the word? You speak about his praise and not his negativity. Why add the word klal at all? Because when the Talmud Chacham fulfills this instruction of the Chazal, the Hevedonis kol adam l'kaf schus, that he should always judge someone mereticiously, you're not saying that you shouldn't judge him negatively. He's saying you should judge him in a merititious manner. Not just positively, in a merititious. What kind of merit could there be here? The answer is that when you judge the person, as we explain in a moment, when you judge him in such a manner, not only do you not say the bad, not only do you say, well, there's something positive here, but you bring out the merit. You judge him mereticiously. You actually bring out the deep merit that's within the person, the deep positivity that's within the person, and that will help the person get rid of their bad. That will make the person truly be a good person. How is it so? So the Alter Rebbe asks the question. The Alter Rebbe asks, how can the sages expect us, in the Tanya, how can the sages expect us to look at a person that is committing sins, doing immoral things, doing unethical things? How can the Chazal expect us to look at him mereticiously? The answer is, the Alter Rebbe says that when you look at the person, you say it's not the person that's doing the sin. Yes, he did it. He's at fault. But really, what brought him to it? What caused him to do this? It's the situation that he's in. It's the circumstances that he encounters. It's the place that he is. Maybe you are more sheltered from all this exposure to negative things, to immoral things, to bad things, because you don't do it. But maybe his parnasa is out in the streets, and he's exposed to it all the time. And his Yetzer Hara is burning like an oven, says the Alter Rebbe. And that's what schlepped him in. But where is the merit in it? The answer is, we know that when Hashem is the one who put him there. So when Hashem gives somebody a nisayon, Hashem gives someone a test, a challenge, he certainly gives them first all the necessary koiches, all the resources, all the potential to be able to overcome it. Otherwise it would be totally unfair. So when you look at this Jew and you say, wow, if Hashem put him in such a challenge, if Hashem put him in such a nisayon, if he is exposed to such bad, that means that certainly Hashem loaded him up with so many levels of greatness, of holiness, of power, of holy power, that only if he would tap into it, he would be much greater than any of us. He would be much greater than the average person, because he's got it all there in him. And that is what the limud zchus, this is what we're looking at him positively and speaking of him mereticiously could affect. That not only will he not do the bad, but he'll be elevated. It'll bring him out to actually realize the potential that's in him. And this is what the directive, the teaching of Emor is. That a person should constantly, tamid, always be speaking positively about another person. And this brings to lahazir gdoilim alaktanim. That those who are gdoilim in Yiddishkeit, those who are greater in Yiddishkeit, either by virtue of the fact that they are more knowledgeable, or because they grew up frum, they know more because they just, even by default, but they are gdoilim. Lehazik doilim alaktanim. On those who are less in Yiddishkeit, it will not only bring it up, it will make them shine. It will make them glow. It will bring out the greatness that's in them. It will elevate them and expose their good that's in them. And now we can appreciate why the expression, the verb is emor and not daber. Because emor is a soft way of talking, which is meant to enhance the person, to lift up the person, to bring them higher. Not daber, which would mean to fight and to combat the bad. Daber also has its place, but here the emphasis is emor. Say it in a pleasant manner. Lift the person up. Bring out their potential. Bring out the merit that's within them. And the Rebbe concludes that, and especially that year when this Sikha was first printed, when it was first edited and printed by the Rebbe, that Beis Iyar, which is, of course, the birthday of the Rebbe Maharash, Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch, who was known for that famous adage which the Rebbe always would repeat, Lechatchila Riber, meaning, he'd say that the world says when you have a problem, when you have an obstacle, the Welt sagt, and it nicht darunter, that if you can't go from under, you go from above. And I say Lechatchila, to begin with, over the top. And the Rebbe says, gives us a very interesting insight into this, which fits in and is consistent with what we just said in the Sikha, that when you go under, meaning you're dealing with the lowly things, you see a person does something wrong, so you try to attack it, you try to call him out for it. Oh, this is wrong, this is bad, you shouldn't do it. In other words, you're seeing the bad that's in the person. That has its place. But what the Rebbe Rashi is saying is, Lechatchila Riber, go to above, deal with, like this, the lesson in this Sikha, deal with the upper things. Look at the good. Emor, say good. See only the positive that's in the Yid. And then for sure, you'll succeed in bringing out in this the true upperness, the true ariber, that the person should be above any of the negativity that even he was once exposed to, even he was once involved in.